Nicotine 2 did this video about a kind of thought experiment with determinism, in which, I think if I get it right, a script of exactly what happens in the universe is sent back in time, and then if a person reads this script, does that mean that they then become able to change it, and if so, what's the status of the script? It's a kind of reworking of the Back to the Future, that whole kind of time travel thing. But for me, I think it's got the same assumptions and the same flaws out of those assumptions that all time travel stories do, which is that in order for, and then this is going to sound like a kind of nuts and bolts answer to an experimental problem, but I think, for me at least, looking at the nuts and bolts of it do reveal some of the philosophical issues and assumptions in it, which is that, to send something from the future into the past, you've basically taken a slice of space, removing it from the space of that's present at that time, if you like, moving it into the past and kind of plugging it in again in a different piece of space. So in the Time Machine, the H.G. Wells story and the film of that, there's this great big, it's kind of Victorian time machine, like a big chair with dials and brass handles and stuff, and a big umbrella at the back. It spins around, and the area that's kind of projected by this umbrella, the space, physical space, is lifted out of the late 19th century and plugged into whatever is in the future, the 25th century. Similarly, in the Back to the Future films, the DeLorean car zooms along at a certain speed. The flux capacitor does whatever it does, and the space that the DeLorean car and the space that the DeLorean car contains are taken out of whatever year it's set, and either forward in time or back in time, and plugged into the space there. And again with the Terminator films, big bubble containing a naked Arnold Schwarzenegger. For some reason clothes don't travel back in time, but flesh does. A big bubble containing Arnold Schwarzenegger, and all the space that he both contains and is contained within is extracted from the space, and again inserted into another piece of space somewhere else. And Nicotine 2 is doing the same thing. It's a small piece of space. The small piece of space that this list of instructions is contained in, but it's space nevertheless. So that's the assumption. And again, lifted out of one time frame and pushed into another. But just thinking practically, what does that mean? What would happen? What's the logic of that? At first thinking about it, I kind of imagined a bang taking place. You know what I mean? Because if a piece of space was removed, the first thing I thought was, all the air would disappear. A vacuum would be left, and the other air from surrounding air from round about the time machine would rush in, and that would create a bang, or at least a very loud popping sound that you get when vacuums are released. But that's not right. That wouldn't happen, because it's not just the air that's being extracted from that particular point in space, it's the space itself. Here's space, here look, space, and then this piece of space here would just go. Not the air, not the bugs flying in the space, not the water vapour molecules that's circulating in it, but the space itself would disappear, and anything inside it, like a time traveller or a list of instructions. Come on, thieves, this way. What would happen if that happened? The only way what my visual imagination does at that point is it kind of imagines the space around it kind of stretching in to fill the gap. Like if you get a tooth pulled out, the surrounding tissue just kind of squishes into that space, doesn't it, and fills it up. Or if you take a lump out of like very soft, like blancmange or jelly or something like that, the rest of the jelly of the blancmange just kind of expands into to fill the gap. So I can kind of imagine the space around it doing that. But what that would mean? That would mean all the stuff around it, all these trees and things, going to bend in to fill the space. That wouldn't work at all. It's just nonsense, isn't it, really? And similarly, what happens when that piece of space containing Arnold Schwarzenegger, or containing Michael J. Fox, or containing a list of instructions, or containing Rod Taylor, is inserted into a different time frame. What happened to the space that was already there? Does it get duplicated? Are these things superimposed onto whatever whatever space was already there, and whatever space was already contained there. Because that doesn't seem right. Or does it kind of expand from a point, push the rest of the space out of the way, in which case you'd see all this stuff around it kind of bulging to get out of its way. Does the total volume of space increase at that point, because you've done this kind of weird economic exchange of moving space from one time to another? I mean, I think it doesn't make sense, because I think there's an assumption about what space is that's incorrect and isn't consistent in the rest of the thought experiment. I think it's treating space as if it's that kind of Newtonian space that we know it isn't. You know what I mean? As if it's this kind of neutral stuff that you can cut into slices. You know, you can cut this slice of space out and just kind of lift it out and put it there, you know. And that's not what space is it? We know that. So, but it's treating it as if it is. I know that sounds like a kind of nuts and bolts response to what's essentially a thought experiment. But the assumption for that thought experiment to make sense is that space is a kind of Newtonian, Cartesian kind of grid thing that you can subdivide without damaging the whole. I mean, the other models, or the other images that are about space and time, that I think are possibly relevant. There's that image of it like a tunnel, isn't there? There used to be a great TV show in the 1960s, I think it was, called The Time Tunnel, in which these time travelers would go back and forward in time, but to do that they had to jump into this weird kind of psychedelic tunnel with a big spiral running around it, and they'd kind of float through this tunnel like this. That's great. Essentially it's doing the same thing. It's imagining space connected through some weird other dimension in which they're kind of metaphorically ascending 3 dimensions into 4. But it's just a kind of trick, really, and that's fine. And I think we do the same when we imagine wormholes. I'm not saying wormholes don't exist, I haven't a bloody clue. But our imagination of them and the drawings of them and their use in things like Star Trek movies is always of these little tunnels, you know, like that. And that's just our attempt to visualise the unvisualisable, I think. No, I don't think that thought experiment works for me because of those assumptions. And I think that Pyro made a response to it as well, I think, or maybe it was something else. Anyway, he was talking about the possibility of instructions being synonymous with imagined, what would the word? Well, just imagined events, really. You know, what's the difference between having a script of what happens in the universe sent back to you through time, and your ability to kind of simulate it in your imagination? I would say every difference in the world. Every difference in the world.